Another question I get asked a lot, and rightly so, is are IVF babies or babies conceived by IVF more likely to get birth defects than babies that are conceived naturally? And certainly there is a myth or there is some suggestion out there that IVF babies are more likely to get birth defects than non-IVF babies. The short answer to that is no. The long answer is a little bit more nuanced. I think if you look at the general birth defect register, and I think if we define birth defects as any sort of structural abnormalities babies are born with that require surgical correction, then we think that everyone who conceives and has a baby has a birth defect rate of about 0.5%. So that's everybody. People who conceive through IVF do have a birth defect of about 1%. And there are certain genetic disorders such as imprinting disorders that have to do with the turning on and off of certain genes on certain chromosomes that are certainly more common in IVF conceptions. The question that we've sort of pondered for a very long time is whether it is the underlying IVF process, the egg retrieval, the manipulation of the eggs with the sperm, the freezing of eggs and embryos, so forth, all of that, are these increased rates of issues, birth defects, genetic abnormalities related to the manipulation of IVF processes and the drugs, or is it related to the underlying reason why people accessed IVF in the first place? So that is it more to do with the infertility than it is to do with the treatment itself? In the last sort of 10 years, we've had some really elegant studies come out that look at this question, I think does give us a very reassuring answer. And that is that when you look at people who had trouble conceiving, but then ultimately conceived naturally, so that is the subfertile population, and compare that with people who went straight to IVF, the birth defects rates are the same. When you also looked at family studies, so studies of families where they had one child conceived with great difficulty naturally, and then another child conceived with IVF. So these are what we call sibling studies. And there are some very nice, elegant studies out there that show that even within the same family, between the child that was conceived naturally versus a child that was conceived with IVF within the same couple, the birth defect rates and the abnormality rates are the same. So what we can probably say with quite a lot of confidence is that it's probably not the IVF treatment itself, but it is the reason why these people needed IVF treatment in the first place. So that it is not the IVF treatment itself, but rather the infertility that is linked to these increased rates. What's more, if you look at Australian data, if you look at Scandinavian data, European data, comparing children who are conceived naturally versus children who are conceived with IVF and following their long-term health trajectories, you'll find that in the major markers, they're the same. Now, this is with the big caveat that IVF really hasn't been around that long compared to the rest of medicine, but all we can say is from the information that we do have, it is fairly reassuring. So yes, there is an increased rate of birth abnormalities and birth defects and some certain genetic issues like imprinting disorders in the IVF population or kids conceived by IVF, but we don't think it is because of the IVF, but it is due to the underlying infertility.